When I was 26, I took a trip to San Diego via plane. I stayed with my friend for a few days and booked a late flight back home. My flight landed at midnight. By the time I was off the plane and by the ground transportation pickup point, it was like 12:30. I waved down a random taxi in the taxi section and gave the driver my home address. He said he'd take me for $30, which was a really good deal compared to Uber. He came out to help me put my bag in the trunk of the van. But I said I was fine with it in the seat next to me, so he lifted my bag onto the seat on the left side behind him. I was sitting diagonal from him. He got back in the car and pulled up the directions to my apartment, and we were on our way. My at the time apartment was about a half-hour drive from the airport with no traffic. At this hour, there was obviously no traffic. We got right on the highway and we were moving fast. I caught the driver's eyes staring at me through the mirror on 2 separate occasions, and on the second time, he spoke. He asked where I was coming from. I said San Diego. He said, "Oh, very nice." Then he asked me what I was doing there. I said I was just visiting a friend who lives there. His response was, "Is your friend as pretty as you?" And honestly, my first reaction was to laugh. But I found the comment really creepy, and it being the third thing out of his mouth on the ride didn't help. From here, his questions kind of stayed on the flirty side. He asked me, "What is a pretty girl like you doing traveling all by yourself?" And I had a slightly sassy response saying, "Well, I just said I wasn't alone, I was visiting my friend." And his rebuttal was that by flying by myself, I was traveling by myself. I maintained my slight sass and said, "We can agree to disagree." And he laughed and said he was only teasing me. This man had to be like 45 though. I felt like him hitting on a lone girl in her 20s like this was slightly creepy. It wasn't the first time I dealt with something like this though. As we continued down the highway, I looked up as I saw the familiar overpass right by my exit, but as we passed it, he wasn't slowing down. I said, "This is my exit," as he was literally about to pass it, and we zoomed right by it. I repeated myself louder, saying that was my exit. He apologized and said he'd catch the next one. I tried to get a peek at his screen to see if he put the right address in, but it was angled so that I couldn't see it. The next exit was about a mile further. I started sitting up on the edge of my seat a bit now. When the next exit approached, I said loud and clear, "You need to get off here." And without acknowledging me, he turned on his blinker and merged off the exit. I noticed him glaring at me for a second in the mirror. I almost sensed a hint of annoyance in his face, but I guess that quickly changed when not even a minute later, he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I replied back instantly, "Yes, he lives with me." I noticed him look at me again, and I think he picked up on how quickly I answered that. He asked what my boyfriend's name is. Yes, I'm serious. I decided that was enough. I told him I'm going to put my headphones in, so I popped my AirPods into my ears, even though they were basically dead still. I just wanted this man to stop asking me questions. Asking my boyfriend's name was next level weird, almost like he was interrogating me. I texted my family and close friends about this creepy taxi driver, and I shared my location in case, God forbid, things went sour. We were in a familiar area in my town now. We were stopped at the first red light since getting off the highway. I looked in the mirror, and all I saw were his eyes glaring at me, almost in this menacing way. I know he didn't say anything to me because I didn't even have any music or anything playing, so I would have heard him. The light was now green and he was still staring at me. I had to tell him the light was green, and he started moving again. No one in my family was answering except for my older brother, who must have been the only one awake, but he lives 2 hours away from me. My brother told me I should leave the car if I feel threatened or in danger. We were now on a main road in my town, but there weren't any cars on the road. It was nearing 1 a.m. on a weeknight. We stopped at another red light and I felt that man glaring at me again through the mirror. I then noticed a police car parked in an empty parking lot. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, I grabbed my bag and backpack and slid the van door open. The man started yelling at me, "What are you doing?" And he tried closing the door with the power button in the front, but I forced it open. And the second the door was opened wide enough for me to fit out, I booked it toward the police car. Instead of getting out of the car and chasing me for my money, he just kept driving, which already was a huge red flag. When I saw him driving away, I stopped running and brought my pace down to a quick walk to the police car. The officer in the car noticed me as I saw him look up and roll down his window. I told him that the taxi driver who was driving me was giving me really bad vibes and I left for my own safety. I asked the cop if he could give me a ride home, and thankfully he said hop in the back seat. Being a scared female obviously helped, but do I think you should be going up to cops asking them to be your free taxi service? Absolutely not. By the time I was in the car, that taxi was already long gone. The cop drove me home, and we were there in about 5 to 10 minutes. I let myself in and didn't even bother unpacking. I went straight to brush my teeth and crashed into bed. It seemed just as I got into bed, though, there was a knock at the front door of my apartment. What if it was the taxi driver? He had my address after all. What if he came for his money? Or worse? The knocks persisted for a few minutes, then went silent for a few minutes, and then there were more knocks. Obviously, I never left my room. I didn't want to be anywhere near the front door. The door was locked, and that's what mattered. Eventually, the knocks stopped and I drifted away to sleep. The next day, I was back to work. I had a slightly later shift, luckily, so I didn't have to get up too early. While I was at work, though, I got a call from my next-door neighbor, George. He said that my dad was there before trying to get into my apartment to drop something off, but he didn't have a key. George was calling to confirm that I was in fact expecting my dad, and I said, no, I hadn't heard from him. George said he didn't see him actually leave anything, though. He was just checking through the windows, which caught his attention. I thanked him, and then called my dad, and as I was expecting, my dad said he was at work and had not stopped by my house. I took this time to explain the entire taxi driver situation to my dad again, but over the phone this time. He wanted me to come home for a few nights, and I said I would. I just need to go home and pack my things up first. After work, I got home around 9 p.m. I finished up my laundry for the night before and packed a bag with some clothes and my work stuff for the next few days. Something in my apartment felt off, though. I never get nervous from being alone, but that night I felt like I wasn't alone. Deep down, I felt like it was because the whole taxi driver situation made me uncomfortable. But I felt like I kept hearing small cracks in the wood floor, like from the pressure of someone's weight. I just couldn't pinpoint from where. I was honestly freaking myself out and tried to hurry up and get all my stuff and go. It was about the moment I was ready to leave the house when I heard a creaking sound from down the hallway from the spare bedroom. I turned and heard a voice say, "I wasn't gonna hurt you." And I saw an arm swing into view from behind the wall, and I just took off to the front door before he could even enter the hallway. I was outside screaming and pounding on my neighbor George's door. It was still early enough where he and his wife were awake. They came rushing outside and I begged for help. Instead of entering my apartment, we called 911 and waited for the officers to show up before going inside. My apartment wasn't huge, so checking each and every potential hiding spot didn't take long. The back sliding door to the shared backyard area was open, which also suggested he fled through the backyard. Unfortunately, I didn't have any record of the taxi ride I took, so I didn't have the cab number or plate number or anything. I could only describe it as a yellow minivan and give the description of the man. I did, however, describe the route we took and the time I remember getting into town, hoping maybe they could knock on some local business doors and check their cameras pointed to the streets. Grabbed my already packed bags and headed to my parents' house, where I stayed for a week. They wanted me to stay even longer, but I had to get back home. My dad helped me install some cameras from Amazon on my front and back doors, and I also bought a taser to put next to my bed for self-defense. I've lived in 2 different apartments since this experience. I've never had to use the taser. I also avoid taxis now if I'm alone, as they are a lot less traceable than a ride-sharing app. But also, I hear about fake taxi drivers kidnapping people all the time. I have to wonder if that was a real taxi driver at all, or if it was a stolen vehicle.